Welcome to Smart Branding, a podcast dedicated to branding, naming, and domain names. I'm Tatiana Bonneau, and with my guests, we try to help you create and grow strong, memorable, and meaningful brands online. I believe time is one of our most precious assets, and so I want to thank you in advance if you decide to spend the next 30 minutes with us. I promise to do my best to make those worth it. Let's go! So today our guest is Swapnil Puranik, founder of Verb Your Brand. Swapnil has a team focusing on helping businesses of all sizes to keep up with the pace of changing customer behavior. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Let's start with a little bit of background.
Thanks, Tatiana. Glad to be here. I think, I'll just give a brief background about myself, right? It's been a pretty accidental discovery, of the marketing world about 2 decades back. I majored in biology, way back, which essentially itself was, it was a decision, it was more of a hangover decision. I could not get into the medical school that I wanted. And hence I decided, I would probably do a graduation in science, which I did. And during the final year, I discovered this entire, world of marketing where, I was writing some copy, some content for college magazines, and kind of just got hooked onto it. That was in 2003. That today, it's been about, pretty fulfilling almost 2 decades of experience in marketing. So that's what, that's like a brief background about me. I worked in agencies all my, throughout the career, and right now I'm running Verb Your Brand for almost 3 years now, which is, where I work with startups and founders, and help them get, their customer experience and their growth, help them get their growth channels more optimized. That's what I've been doing.
So what exactly do you do? How did you after you said some biology, obviously that's part. Then you did some copy. Then you've worked with startups. So how did that come up as an idea, focusing on exactly what you're doing now?
Right. So I think it's it's been a series of stumbling blocks. As I said, biology was, something that I really, cared about at the time. And then, this entire love of, how you can write words to influence decisions and to influence minds. I think that kind of was pretty fascinating for me at the time, as a 19-year-old, if somebody were to say that, you can write 5 lines and, help somebody make somebody purchase something, a product or a service. That's quite liberating, right? As somebody, as a 19. And then, I stuck with that for a fairly large amount of time. I think the earlier 3 to 4 years of my career, I was in the creative field. But as as I grew in the agency, right, from a copywriter to a senior copywriter and so on and so forth, I realized that there is a lot of influence that strategies have, for brands to decide, which creative would work, what is the route. And, as you progress in your career, you want to kind of double click on almost everything happening around you, right? If I've spent certain hours coming up with a campaign idea and that campaign is not getting work, or if that campaign is getting rejected, I really want to know why, right? And that's where, I kind of got hooked onto this entire, how do strategies work, right? I mean, how do, one marketing person somewhere sitting, who's not worked, and it also, kind of hurts your ego as a creative person to begin with, like, how can person who doesn't understand, anything about creative copywriting is, saying no to my idea, right? Then, so I kind of deep dive onto that. And then, as you progress further, you realize that, there is a lot more, to any marketing campaign, right? I mean, creative is just probably one aspect of it, but it's, essentially what does the brand stand for? What are the customer insights? What are the, strategies? How do you, marry those strategies, with the business goals, with the revenue goals and so on and so forth. So I think that journey has, personally and professionally, I think has been pretty fulfilling for me, honestly. So over the next, I think about 10, 12 years, I, focused purely on, helping businesses, get their positioning right, helping them helping them to get their customer insights and customer experience right, and so on and so forth. So that's how it's been. And obviously, there has been, I think it will be an understatement to say that, the way the brands communicate and the way the brands market now has changed considerably since, I think, 2014, 2015, right? I mean, since the time that social media became all pervasive, right? So whatever traditional marketers knew about content, and consumer marketing, that kind of just changed. And I don't think that anybody was prepared for that level of, change to deal with. So I think that's how, the progressive, my journey on the marketing field, got to today, right? Where in 2019 is when I decided that, I think there's a lot of value for me to add to, to work with individual founders and clients directly rather than being part of a larger organization. And that's been, the synthesis of what I'm doing right now. So that's fairly the progress there.
How did you come up with Verb Your Brand? Why that name?
Okay, so that's pretty interesting. As I was saying, that a lot of things were changing in the consumer marketing world, right? If you are anyone, who's done some amount of marketing in late 90s, I think in fact, late 80s and late 90s, you had this pretty strong, notion about, having a pretty good brand name and then, spending hours and months and millions of dollars to get that brand positioning right, and then spend another $1 million to, to get the brand campaign right, and so on and so forth. All that to say that, people were trying to influence the consumer, behavior and the way consumers perceived your brand, right? And it worked at the time. But, over the years, right? I mean, especially since social media, right? I mean, I think audiences, your buyers, they became much more aware of, what they're buying into, correct? The reason why you see the sudden shift of, traditionally, cola brands or, FMCG companies who've been, notoriously known for, unhealthy drinks and unhealthy foods, suddenly the entire shift from unhealthy to health. Right? I mean, that all was, I think it was more of a push decision than a pull decision, right? I mean, they realized that, customers are pushing for that change, and hence they changed that entire, business strategy and the entire business models around that. So that started to happen pretty mainstream, right? And over the last few years, I have actually come to believe in that notion that you can spend whatever you want to as a brand to create a very good sounding brand, right? But at the end, if you're not true to what your values are, to what your cultural codes are, and if you're not in sync with the macro and the micro trends, which your users and your buyers are, following, you would just end up being, you will just end up being a good noun, right? Like, you would just remember the brand, like, you would remember them for all the reasons that, it will not move the needle, right? From awareness to conversion. And hence the whole idea of, do you really want your brand just to be a noun, or you really want to, be known for action, right? Where, you are standing for what, what you say. People don't really care about your positioning statements. People really care about what you have done, right? If there is a movement happening somewhere, did you take a stand? Did you stand for the cause that your customers share, and so on and so forth, right? So I think the actions are something which count more than good sounding words, as opposed to 2 decades back to what it is right now. So that kind of, it seemed pretty obvious, right? I mean, you don't want, you want your brand to stand for an action, right? So hence Verb Your Brand, right? Where how can you help your brand take, and, it doesn't have to be really big. It has to be those small, nuanced, subtle, actions that you need to take. For example, it could be, it could be as simple or small as, what you say and what you do in your email marketing or on social media, post. And it could be as big as, at a brand level, at a global level, what you do. So it's really up to that, right? I mean, take actions and not just, like spend your time and effort coming up with nice sounding lines, which doesn't do anything to anyone.
Definitely agree with that. And that's something that comes up more and more in conversations that I have at work, and also in life as a consumer myself, that authenticity that we look for brands now. It's not just enough to, there used to be a time, we're old enough to remember, where you would just go and get, whatever, I don't know, your mother was getting, or whatever you used to, or whatever is cheaper, or whatever is. Then we started looking at the brand name, and it's like, oh, okay, that's a brand I know, that looks kind of okay. And now you're like not just looking at the brand name and the history and your personal history with it, but also like, what are they doing today? Where do they stand on those issues that matter to me? And all of that is running so quickly. I noticed that on your website as well. You mentioned how quickly consumers change and how hard it is for brands, especially bigger brands, actually not only, to keep up with that change.
Right. And I think, it's been true. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember as a child, I never questioned what your parents got into the house, right? I mean, and it also got to do with the fact that, in India, you don't really question your parents, right? So it's just the culture, right? So, besides that, as a fact, you didn't really have any tools to access information, right? If you really wanted to know more about a certain brand, right? I mean, there was really no access to that, right? I mean, that has completely changed over the last, I think I would like to say the last 15 years, but I think it's essentially from the last 5 to 6 years that, people have really, really, started to speak with their actions, right? I mean, people, I think it's very easy to see where people are spending money, right? I mean, that's the best language that a customer can speak, and the most powerful language at that, right? Where they're putting their money in. So that, and also I think, I think I completely agree with you. I think you've kind of encapsulated that really nice. People are looking for, they want to partner with brands. I think that's the underlying current, right? I mean, people really don't, even if you're a small brand, even if you're a D2C brand, or you are a multi-billion-dollar legacy brand, I mean, people really want to see you as what you stand for. What are you as a person, right? If tomorrow a cola brand wants to be, what would that cola brand look if it were a person, right? Would I be would I be friends with you? Would I hang out with you, on a Monday morning or a Friday evening? People just really want to connect more and more with the brands, right?
Yeah.
And if they don't see that connect, I think, there are, way many options today than there were earlier. So.
Yeah. And another analogy I see in one too, because you mentioned the verb your brand. So basically, effectively, in a way, it's like living what you're saying. It's not just about words, branding nowadays. Right. It's not just about pretty words and pretty logos. And like you said, if you're not authentic, if that brand doesn't have more than just that, that's not going to save it. And I work with names, and particularly premium domain names. And that's oftentimes something that I say to people. It's like the best domain names is not going to save you if you don't have a good product, if you don't have an authentic brand. It's not going to happen. I mean, obviously, if you do have them, that can be a huge advantage. But if you don't, it's just not going to carry you through, years of business and building a strong brand globally.
Absolutely. And I think, there is a lot to be said about, the connection between a good domain name and a good brand name, right? I mean, you would often see that, people would look at, and I know I can talk about from my own experience that, when I talk to, founders, or even if I talk to some of the brand heads, right? They would, surprisingly enough, they would look at both of these things, in isolation. And that is quite surprising for me, right? I mean, if your brand is X, but if your domain name does not represent that accurately, or, as effectively as your brand, what your brand stands for, then I think you are just creating that friction from, at level 0, right? I mean, people would want to have domain names which are much more fancier, right? And if I can just probably share an example, of one of the founders I had I was speaking to, I think, a few days back. He's building a very cool, B2B SaaS product, addressing large scale enterprises. It's an internal chat software that he's building, and he's flying to market to probably, Forbes 500 or so on and so forth. And it's his product, it's pretty simple. It's direct, so much to say that, it's a pretty boring product. It's an internal communications tool for a legacy enterprise company, right? I mean, there is nothing glamorous. There's nothing sexy about it, right? I mean, it's a pretty boring product. But on the contrary, he wanted a very fancy name, and he booked about like 5 or 6 domain names, with cool, extensions like, IO and comms. And it's like, I genuinely don't think that how is that going to make a difference, right? I mean, domain names are important. They are, a level 0 of, point of contact with anybody, right? I mean, all your prospective customers and users. But at some point, your domain name has to be in relevance or in alignment with what you are trying to offer. You cannot have, fancy.io and what do you say? We sell internal chat software. It just doesn't connect. So, it's kind of funny that, people look at these things in isolation. I think domain name increasingly, even more so, I think with all these extensions that are available to us right now, I think domain names serve a very good conversation or an icebreaker, so to speak, right? And if you're smart enough, you would have a domain name which does not reveal exactly that what you do, but at least gives a fair amount of idea for the user, right? I mean, they should know what they're getting into, right? I mean, if that makes sense. And I'm sure that you would have much more insight on that.
Yeah, I think the first word you used, and it's very indicative because I think it's kind of a naturally the first feeling you get is you mentioned the word friction. And that's very much, and again, I say that to people, find myself saying to entrepreneurs I talk to often, it's like you do have options. Now you do have options. It's just, you shouldn't, like, I wouldn't even go advising somebody to do this or do that. It's just be aware of that it's an important decision. It's not just like, just get any domain name. No, be aware that it's an important decision. Be aware that it speaks for your company and what it means for your marketing, for your communication, for your security, for the security of your customers' data. So be aware of all of those things and then make an informed choice. It's just not a little detail. So it has to be in keeping with your brand. Like you say, it has to communicate. I think there was a quote recently, so somewhere on our website, the girls were compiling something, but it was about Dave.com, and it's a financial fintech business. And the founder was saying when we started, we had trydave.com. It just doesn't work because, I mean, it's finance, it's serious. You want authority. It's like try Dave. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's nothing with the company position, mission, what they're selling, etc.
I completely agree. And, just adding on to that point, right? I mean, today, there's this pretty nice, email, I think ISP got launched a few months back, it just says, hey. Right now, I think the team behind Basecamp, I think they are the ones that they launch it. I'm not sure. I have to probably double check on that. But they launched this, email service provider called Hey. Now, it may sound pretty trivial, right, as a domain name, right? I mean, what does Hey mean? But come to think of it, it's such a simple way of communicating what the product is. Right? But their product is email marketing. Their product is email, right? So Hey makes perfect sense for that. So if you're product offering, if your service offering, goes in line with whatever name that you're looking for, I think, by all means, go for it. And then, as I said, I mean, there are multiple other aspects to think of. Do you have enough budgets for it? Does it make sense? Is it pretty close to what the competition is doing? You just don't want to just change one alphabet or just change one word, to what your competition is doing. Right? So, be aware of all the aspects around you, but at the same time, stay true to what in the long term, right? I mean, domains are not something that, you want to buy today and then again you want to change in the next 2 years. I mean, it's a long-term commitment, right? So be aware of the fact that how do you see your product or your brand to evolve, at least if not in the next 5 years, but at least for the next 3 years, right? Do you have that roadmap in place, right? I mean, what are the things that you're willing to do and what are the things that you will never do, as a as a brand or as a business. Be aware of all those things and then go and invest, right? Because it's a pretty long-term investment, even if it's not, if not in terms of money, but I think it's in terms of, that the association with that domain, right? I mean, it's not going to go anywhere, anytime soon. So just be aware of all those aspects.
Definitely. I completely agree with you on that. We kind of touched on brand fragmentation and changing and how people get stuck in their ways in a way. And you talk about on your website incoherent and broken customer experience. And you mentioned about like it could be images that are not matching somewhere, or it could be different communication. But I have that similar question with most of my guests because I've experienced it myself. It's kind of like I can help people act on something and do better on something. In my case, it's domain names when they know they have a problem. But a lot of people don't realize they have a problem. So in your case, how would somebody know they should come to you and they have a problem? What would be some signs, let's say? Right.
No, I think you just hit the nail right there, Tatiana. I think most of us, you don't even realize that you have a broken customer experience, till it's too late, right? Unless, you are, and that's especially true if you're a fast growing startup. Right. If you are a well-established business, there are, because you are so spread out and you have multiple channels, right? So there would be small incident reports coming in from, different departments or different people, right? Spread across the organization. But if you're a fast growing startup, the chances are that you may not even know, that you have a broken customer experience, right? I mean, you would probably only realize it once, whenever you have that review meeting or you're reviewing your analytics and you suddenly see that there is a drop or why there is a mismatch, right? I mean, why are people coming to my landing pages, clicking on the ads, but why are we not converting, enough leads? Why are we not capturing enough leads? Why is the funnel broken, right? I mean, why is instead of the inverted funnel, why is it, like out of place somewhere? It's only then that people realize that, let's just review everything. The way I look at it is it's pretty simple, right? Most of the problems, they start when people or departments or individuals, they work in isolation, right? As long as, you don't have an aligned, an alignment in terms of, what is that we are, set to achieve, with this campaign or with this product launch or brand launch or feature launch. It could be anything, right? I mean, it could be as small as that, or it could be as big as the brand launch. It doesn't matter. But as long as teams are aligned, right, and they know exactly what are the KPIs that they're working for, and if there is if there's a repository of all that needs to be done, correct, and if there is one single source of information or one single source of truth, I think that itself, kind of, takes away a lot of, operational, errors, that would lead to broken customer experience. So that is one. Second is what at a strategic level, what is it that you want to do, right? And most of what I, tell my clients, I mean, it is all common sense. I'll be very honest. It's not something, very rocket science, where I'm discovering new things. What I'm doing is I'm just asking them pretty simple questions, right? They show me a beautiful, banner ad. And my next question is, what happens if I click on this ad? You go to a certain landing page. Now, does the language on your ad match with the language of your landing page, right? I mean, do you have the same visual, do you have the same call to action? Do you have same, reasons to believe on your landing pages as well? And if you do, what happens if I actually fill up the form, right? And what kind of an email do I get, right? And now, because you have so much of rich information about me as a user, how are you, how are you leveraging that to give me a pretty smooth, seamless, onboarding experience or nurturing experience, right? I mean, these are just simple things, which are often overlooked at the expense of, just, we want to do something cool, we want to do something different, right? I mean, I think the success lies in doing the boring things, perfectly well, so as to, deliver that customer experience. I mean, you don't have to do anything fancy. Me as a user, the least I'm expecting out of you is to communicate with me effectively at every time, right? I mean, I want you to tell me what am I supposed to do, or I want you to tell me if I'm doing something wrong, or so on and so forth, right? And my expectations are pretty limited as a user. You don't overcomplicate it, and in the process, you have 4 different tools talking to each other via an automation tool, which like incidentally would break if there is too much of a traffic, or if someone somewhere has done a bad job of integrating that tool, and then the entire the customer experience breaks. So it's pretty simple, and it's surprising to me that how very few people would pay attention to this. Like it's almost surprising to me. Yeah.
Oh no, I can totally relate to that. And sometimes even like big companies, you can get blown away with the sort of things that the hoops they get you through, and the stuff they get you to either fill in more than once the same information, like that about me already, or other things that they would suggest you stuff that's completely irrelevant. You've already said it's just crazy. Yeah. And so big companies get to those things wrong, let alone smaller companies, I can imagine.
True that.
What stage does one have to be with their business to benefit from your services the most? Because you said, for example, like your processes, you go through an existing customer experience. Would somebody, for example, benefit from consulting you before they go developing that process?
Right. That's a great question. So the way Verb Your Brand, works is, there are two ways that I usually work with brands. One is brand, a startup, which has actually found its product market fit, and they would have at least say 25 to 100 paying customers, depending on what your product or your service is, right? Somebody, if they are raising funds, so somebody who is in the lookout for raising their Series A, so that is a very good indication that they have found their product market fit. They have at least 100 paying customers, and they have a fixed ARR, and they are looking to scale their customer base, right, their customer acquisition, right? And that is the time when most of these things fall, because till then it is probably one person managing the entire thing, but then suddenly if you increase the scope exponentially, it's just not one person, right? I mean, the chances are that they would either outsource their services to someone, or they would hire a team to do it, correct? And that's where things start to fall apart. So I think that is, to me, that's an ideal customer profile for me, and those are the kind of people I think that I add the most amount of value to. So that would be that. Second is, I do a lot of, one-on-one chats with founders, of these startups. If I'm not doing at a business level, I do it, with the founders as well, where they would often, want to discuss some ideas, or they would want to discuss some doubts that they would have about a certain product feature or certain campaign idea or whatever it is, right? Which they may not really want to talk to their team about, or they are just, in two minds themselves to decide. So I essentially kind of, just step in as the sounding board, right? I mean, and it's just not marketing, right? I mean, if they really want to talk about, I have had a few conversations where, I have spoken to the founder about how to communicate culture more effectively to the new hires, right? I mean, I've spoken to somebody who was planning to hire a tech co-founder, and he did not know, he'd spoken to a few people and he did not know what are, some of the qualities that he should look for, and he was like, he had his own biases, and how to overcome that. So there are those bunch of conversations where I think founder is more comfortable, talking to someone outside of the system, probably comes with no bias or no judgment towards anything. I think they probably feel more comfortable with that. So I think, if a business is in any of those fronts, I think that's where I am able to add most value to anyone.
Sure. Great. Because you just said you spoke to quite a lot of entrepreneurs, both on the consulting side and also solving problems with them. What sort of trends do you notice that would be impacting the decisions, the branding decisions businesses make today?
I think top of the mind, which comes to my mind and, which I've been thinking a lot lately is, and we touched upon a few of them, earlier that, how does a brand really, think beyond themselves, and think about customer first, right? I mean, right from, what are the values that your customers are looking for, and what are the things that if you can, just probably, crystal gaze into the future and, identify, what are the 2 or 3 things, which probably are at a very macro level right now, right? But for a fact that, probably in the next 2 years, those things, or those values would become more important, correct? A very classic, case in point was this entire, diversity. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, inclusion and diversity has always been in all the conversations for, as many years, but it's only in the last, I think last 8 or 10 years that, it's really been pushed across all the channels, right? I mean, it's not just on the marketing side, but also how do you, which vendors do you engage with, right? I mean, who are the people that you partner with and so on and so forth, right? So if you as a business, if you as a brand are not anticipating what may happen, you'll always be playing the catch-up game and you will never be ahead of the curve, where you are seen as more proactive brand or a brand, which has got its ear to the ground, who's listening to customer sentiments and who's responding to it proactively. So I think, that is increasingly has become more important, and I think it will become even more important as we progress further. Second aspect of it, I think, is, and we've all been talking about it, is the impact of artificial intelligence, right? As a business, if you're a startup in the field of, if you are a Web3 startup, or if you're a, startup in, any of those Web3 ecosystem, be it blockchain or be it a wallet or be it, whatever it is, how are you staying, how are you, not crossing the line of, which is a very thin line between, being unethical or, how do you convey what your true intentions are to your customers, right? I think that is going to be more and more important, right? I mean, if you've seen the results that Stable Diffusion, is delivering right now, which are like probably, I think 100 times better than what they were about, 6 months back, which Tally was producing.
Actually, yeah, moving.
Right. So I think the improvements in AI now will be exponential, right? Even if it is like 0.1% difference, I think the result or the outcome that we're going to see, I think those will be much more exponential than what we've been seeing, right? And there will be a lot of conversation around like, who would own the intellectual properties, right? I mean, is it the owners of the original data sets, who created that content, or me as a creator who is using that data set, and creating something of my own, correct? So and you would see that trend. I mean, there is AI who's curating images for you. There is an AI which, there are tools which are doing rendition, architectural renders for you. There are tools which are writing copy for you, and so on and so forth, right? So as a brand, how are you leveraging the technology in the most ethical way? And I think third is, again, coming back to customer experience, right? I mean, in such a fragmented, world that we are going to get into, how do you, ensure that you are delivering that consistent and constant customer experience across all the channels? I think that is something which is of more interest to me. And finally, I think marketing in some years, will essentially be a byproduct to the customer experience that you're providing, and not, right now it's the other way around, right? I mean, marketing drives customer experience, right? But I think as we progress further, and that's my prediction, is in the next 5 years, I think marketing would end up being a byproduct of a larger customer experience strategy that any brand would think of, right? So yeah, I think those are the few, thoughts and discussions that I have been having with a lot of people that I speak to right now.
That's very interesting. You mentioned, and as we were speaking, I was thinking as well, because we touched on as well on authenticity and how a brand effectively, you can't just say things nowadays and put pretty pictures. You have to literally, not just the brand has to live it, but like inside out, everything, like the founders, the people that work there. There's information everywhere. Everybody's walking around with their phones. So like if you say I'm a brand that stands for that, literally, the least important employee you have and their dog, they have to stand for that as well. And they have to oblige to, those values, and they have to be subjected to those values as well. Like you have to, you can't say, I'm for equality and have somebody who is working there who, clearly is not equally paid as the rest, etc. And that very much matches or works with what you're saying, that effectively, in a way, it used to be that marketing and branding as part of it was, the big bosses get in a room and make the decisions, and then we decide, okay, that's the image we're going to give to the world. And now it's going to be, okay, that's the image we need to have, and the people we need to employ and the people we need to be if we want to survive in this space.
Right. I think you touched upon a very important part of it, right? I mean, it's brand today is not just, what you represent externally, right? I mean, it's got to do, with what you represent internally as well, right? I mean, and you've kind of, just touched upon that pretty well, that, your employees are your biggest ambassadors, right? I mean, if your employees don't believe in you, I mean, we have seen what's happening in big tech, right? I mean, people, living for the cause which has not been supported, what they believe in. And I think, increasingly that will, possibly percolate to other industries and other categories and, and other geographies as well. So I think, I mean, that's a pretty important aspect as well. Yeah.
We live in interesting time. And I guess that will be interesting to see how established big brands deal with that, some of which are already struggling, obviously, because as hard as it is, as we talk about helping and finding problems and solving problems for smaller businesses, it's much harder to do that on a bigger scale when you're, a huge corporation with very established ways and structures of doing things. So I would imagine it will be interesting to see in the coming years how that shifts and how those big companies do.
Yeah. No, I think I completely agree. These are pretty interesting times, and what's happening around us, outside of the world of marketing and branding. I think almost every other aspect, of our lives, be it geopolitical or be it related to human rights, civil rights, or whatever. I think all these factors will play into the way brands and businesses function. I mean, it has to. You really can't, kind of isolate, all these things differently, because at the end, if your customer is getting affected by any of these factors, how you as a brand cannot be affected as well, and how you cannot address that, right? I mean, all these aspects, I think, and we've seen that, right? When, the writing is pretty clear on the wall that, brands have taken sides, or they have not stood for certain causes, and they have
the luxury to stay neutral now. I'm a living example. I mean, and my kids are even worse or better. I mean, depending on how you look at it. We go to the shop and there's like, I'm not buying that brand of pasta because they are on that side of whatever issue. And that's it. And there's no even looking at price, quality, nothing. It really doesn't matter. And that's more and more. And again, I find looking at how kids do things, even if it sometimes seems crazy, it's very telling about where things are going in the future, because
absolutely
they're growing. I remember my son once said, I had to send him something and I sent it and he wasn't replying. And I'm like, why are you not replying? Did you get that thing? And he's like, where did you send it? I'm like, I sent it on email. And he's like, Mom, nobody uses email anymore. I'm like, okay. It's like, all right, check. Nobody uses email anymore. You're old.
Right. No, and I think if I'm a brand marketer right now, right, I mean, I don't know how I'm going to get sleep tonight, right? Because I literally, right, I mean, if I really want to survive for the next 20 years, I mean, these are the, I have to see where the kids are going, right? Instead of the way we were influenced, like when we were kids, right? We were sold burgers and colas as a healthy alternative. We were sold cereals as a healthy breakfast, right? I mean, the kids of today, they're not going to get bullied or they're not going to get brainwashed as easily as we were. right?
Oh,
Because,
yeah. Definitely.
right? I mean, so I think for you as a brand, I mean, you literally have no other option but to, be as honest as possible, be transparent as possible, and be willing to show what's under the hood, right? I mean, be willing to show, for example, if you're a manufacturer, and be willing to show your manufacturing facilities, be willing to share the numbers of, what is your diversity percentage, right? I mean, and how you are being true to it. How are you, if you've pledged for a climate, whatever, climate pledge, then be true to that, right? I mean, and there are signs, I mean, it's happening, right? I mean, you have integrated reporting, which started, with Europe, and now it's like most parts of the world, you have to have an integrated reporting. So all those signs are there. But as a brand, as a business, I think, all these factors around us, I think they're all going to have some impact or the other. Some probably will outweigh the others, but, be rest assured that, it's not just going to be an easy cakewalk that these guys had over the last half a century or so.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, it's been a pleasure and very interesting. Where can our audience reach you?
So the easiest way to reach out is verbyourbrand.com. And I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is SwapDP, which is SWAPDP. And I think those are the two best ways to get in touch with me if anyone wants to get in touch with me.
Wonderful. All right. It's been great. It's been very insightful. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you. Thanks, Tatiana. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure having this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in this episode of Smart Branding Podcast. Feel free to visit smartbranding.com for more information and reach out if you have any suggestions, questions, ideas, or just want to learn more about how a good domain name strategy can help you build a strong and successful brand. See you next time.